Night shifters. What's the scariest paranormal activity you've witnessed during your shift? I used to work at a 24-hour subway. I know, great start to a paranormal story, right? One night around 3:30 in the morning, I was doing dishes while my coworker cleaned the toaster oven and bread oven. Out of nowhere, I heard the front door chime. Out of habit, I called out, "Welcome to Subway," as I turned the corner. Nobody was there. My coworker was gone too. I figured he might have hopped the counter to go smoke outside, something he did occasionally. I headed back to the sink, but then the door chime went off again. I checked the front. Nothing. I checked the bathrooms. Still nothing. At that point, I was thinking, what the hell? I abandoned the dishes and stood at the front counter, staring at the doors. A couple of minutes later, my coworker walked in through the back delivery door. "Where'd you go?" I asked. "To take out the trash," he said. A little later, the door chime went off again. This time, my coworker did exactly what I had. Called out, "Welcome to Subway," and turned the corner. Nobody was there. But this time, the front door was wide open. Our doors were weighted, so they always closed on their own if you let go. We stood there staring as it stayed open for a couple of minutes, which made absolutely no sense. Then, without warning, it slammed shut. It wasn't a windy night, and even on the windiest days, those doors would never stay open like that. I have no idea what caused it or why it happened on that particular night. After I left for a different job, I was told it never happened again. We told our boss and checked the security cameras. Nobody could explain it. Story 2, Kwajalein Island, 1993. I was an MP deployed there to guard Chinese refugees. They were housed in tents in an old ammunition storage area. Scattered around were empty concrete ammo bunkers, big, dark structures that had been converted into air-conditioned spots where we'd sit during night shift. One night, I fell asleep in a chair inside one of those bunkers and had a dream so vivid it still sticks with me. I dreamed that behind me, in the darkness, hundreds of voices were whispering. I felt fingers brushing my shoulders, tugging at my shirt, pulling me toward the shadows. I jolted awake, heart pounding, and of course, there was nothing there. The next day, I was on patrol with one of the civilian contractors who worked base security. I told him about the dream, described the bunker, the spot I'd been sitting in. He got quiet, then told me that particular bunker was where mass graves had been dug for the island's Japanese defenders during World War II. I never set foot in that bunker again for the rest of the deployment. Story 3. I used to work as a security guard at a hospital in Bowmanville, Ontario, Canada. The hospital was split in half by the old wing, built in the late 1800s, and the newer section. One night, I was doing my rounds and decided to walk down a long corridor next to the main entrance of the old hospital, where all the wheelchairs were stored. As I rounded the corner, I saw a woman standing at the far end of the hallway. She was wearing a long blue button-up coat, black shoes, and some kind of winged bowler hat. She scared the hell out of me, so I turned my head and closed my eyes for a moment. When I looked back, she was gone. A few days later, I was walking through the entrance hallway of the new hospital and stopped to look at some old photos hanging on the wall. I saw a picture from the opening of the original hospital wing and immediately noticed the same woman I had seen days earlier, standing among nurses dressed in white. She looked like a head nurse or something similar. It sent a big shiver down my spine. Story 4. In my 20s, I was renting the basement suite of an old Victorian house in Calgary. One night, I was in the living room arguing with my boyfriend and stomped into the kitchen for a smoke. I was facing the front door, which was deadbolted, when I saw a man standing right in front of it. He looked like he was from the 1930s. Hands clasped around an old fedora, shoulders tense, and wearing this anxious, hopeful smile as if to say, "Please don't be afraid." I whipped my head to call my boyfriend, completely panicked, and when I turned back, he was gone. We checked the door, still deadbolted. We checked the windows, all locked. There was no logical way he could have been there or left. No explanation at all. Story 5. I worked night shift at a hotel. I also had a day job, and the manager was cool about letting me sleep as long as I woke up if someone needed help. One night, I woke up and saw a man, or more like the silhouette of a man, staring at me through the windows of the Dutch door to the courtyard. He was really tall, maybe 6.5 feet, and he wore a black duster or trench coat and a hat. I jumped up from the couch, put down the remote I had fallen asleep with, and rushed to the door to see what he needed, but he was gone. There was no sign of him anywhere in the courtyard, and there were only 2 long, straight paths. He could not have run fast enough to disappear like that. I forgot about it and continued my shift. About 3 weeks later, my coworker was telling me about an evil spirit that lived in one of the rooms. All the employees knew there were at least 4 haunted rooms, as well as the elevator. He started describing a tall, shadowy man. I interrupted and said, like 6 or 7 feet tall, black coat and hat. He turned white and stared at me. "You have seen it too?" I told him what happened. That innocent moment from weeks earlier suddenly became much creepier. Another time, at another job, I was getting ready to do security rounds at roughly 3:15 in the morning. I was whistling the Arthur movie theme song. It had just played on the radio. It was dead quiet, except for crickets. As I opened the door to the patrol car still whistling, I heard a whistle from the bushes sitting on a 60-foot cliff. It was the same tune in the same type of whistle I have. I do not whistle normally. Mine is windier, softer, and much quieter. But this whistle sounded exactly like mine, playing the exact same song. I froze. The whistling continued. I got into the car and took off. I stayed out about 20 minutes longer than usual, and when I finally went back, I was careful, nervous, and paranoid the entire time. I never saw anyone or anything, and I never heard it again. But on that note, sometimes when I fell asleep at that job, I would wake up to the sound of my former boss shouting my name. He used to come in around the same time I would hear the voice and wake up. It happened fairly regularly. The strange part is that he had been dead for 3 years when it started. Story 6. I worked in a grocery store from 2015 to 2017. I posted this a while ago, but I'll share it again. It wasn't exactly scary, just really unsettling. Some nights, I would see shadows or quick shapes out of the corner of my eye while sweeping the aisles or cleaning the meat department. I would even see strange silhouettes in the meat department. Things would fall off shelves, even items pushed far back like a box of rice that should have landed safely on the shelf. There was a constant feeling of being watched, or of hearing voices when no one was around, especially on nights I worked alone. Co-workers who also worked solo would say the same thing, even swearing they heard us talking when we weren't there. We would also hear footsteps coming up the stairs to the employee break room, whether all of us were upstairs together or someone was working alone. Equipment would sometimes be moved or shifted. Once, I saw a mop handle stand upright on its own for about 3 seconds, then readjust itself, even though nothing could have caused it. We would often see faces in the windows looking in at us, even though no one was outside at that hour. A coworker once asked if I was playing a joke on him while I was cleaning the bandsaw in the meat department. I told him no. I had my headphones in, listening to BBC on NPR. He said he heard footsteps behind him while he was mopping near the cash registers, and he felt like someone was watching him. The next night was full of strange activity, and we even found a footprint that didn't match any of our shoes, with no sign that anyone else had been inside. It was in an area with mop water from cleaning a caked-in spill, since we were always left with the tougher jobs. One especially creepy night, I was working alone and cleaning the meat department. While hosing off the preparation table, I watched the plastic door strips move on their own. Usually, if one strip is pushed aside, the air shifts and all of them move, which is how I could tell if a coworker was sneaking up on me. But this time, no one was there. I looked around, and the place was completely empty. When I stepped out to steady myself, I saw someone out of the corner of my eye walking through the area, even though I knew no one else was in the building. Later, after I finished cleaning and turned off the lights, I saw the deli slicer moving on its own, as if someone were trying to use it. Former night shift supervisor's experiences. Here are a couple more things I remember. One night, right before you came in, I was checking the till amounts at the main safe. I heard footsteps behind me, turned around twice, and saw no one there. Everyone had already gone home. I tried to ignore it, even though it scared me. And not even 2 minutes later, I heard a loud, angry male voice shout, "You fucking bitch!" right in my ear. I spun around and again, no one was there. I stopped working and waited for you to arrive because I was too freaked out to continue. Another time, Trip, his nickname, had already shown up and was upstairs talking to his girlfriend on the phone. I was in the cereal aisle facing the shelves when I saw a box of Frosted Flakes from the very back launch itself off the shelf and hit the floor flat. It didn't bounce or slide. It just dropped. About 20 minutes later, Trip sprinted into the meat room and yelled for whoever was in there to get out because the store was closed. He had seen the plastic door strips moving on their own, and we both knew those doors only sway like that when someone walks through them. When I asked him what happened, he said he thought a customer, someone known for messing around in the meat department, had gone in to try to grab ribs or a rotisserie chicken. But when he went in to check, there was no one there. More of my own experiences. When Trip and I worked together, we would often see shadow figures dart across the aisles in a split second, especially when we were looking straight down the aisle. It wasn't bad lighting, The bulbs had actually been replaced the week before. A jug of Tide once fell from the second shelf, even though it had been tucked in the back. We both stumbled on it sitting on the floor, and neither of us saw or heard it fall. Nothing was broken. Sometimes the music that played through the intercom would cut out briefly, as if someone was about to make an announcement. All we would hear was the little ping it made. Once, we heard what sounded like a woman let out a quick, and then it faded away. We rushed to the front of the store, saw nothing, and checked every phone, even the ones by the offices and service center. Nothing was out of place. This happened to anyone working in or near the meat room. We would see shadow figures inside, whether the lights were on or off. Carts used to move tubs of meat would shift from where we left them after cleaning, and we would hear equipment moving around. We also saw faces in the windows out of the corners of our eyes, even though no one was there. Story 7. I'm in law enforcement. My partner and I were sent to a call for an alarm activation. No big deal. But this wasn't one of our usual alarms. It was a new one we'd never been to before. It took us longer than normal to find the house because it was way back off the road and there were no lights on. When we finally found it, the place was super creepy. Spiders and webs were everywhere. There was nothing outside the house. No trash cans, no knickknacks. We split up as usual to check for open doors and windows. I went one way, he went the other. The house had 2 stories. On the first floor, I found a garage or carport area and a locked shop of some sort, but nothing seemed off. My partner was still making his way around from where he started. I found the stairs to the second floor and headed up. I ended up on a giant covered porch attached to the house. It was huge, literally the size of the carport below, with about 4 sets of wicker outdoor furniture. I looked around, but didn't see anything particularly weird. My partner finally made it upstairs, and we talked for a minute about the odd layout. During this time, I felt slightly unsettled, but couldn't pinpoint why. I started looking more closely through the sliding glass doors at the front of the house. My partner told me everything was locked up on his side, and there were even vines growing over some windows and doors. I began noticing little things in the living room. The carpet looked like it was from 1962. There was no TV, no electronics at all, and the layout was very 60s. I thought all of that was odd, but I've seen weirder things on this job. I then asked dispatch what the alarm activation had been. They told me attic exit. Super specific and very strange, but okay. So we started looking around the living room as best we could. There was no attic. Then it occurred to me, what if it was outside, on this giant covered porch? I looked up and sure enough, directly above me was an attic. I could even see the alarm sensor boxes on it. I looked at my partner and told him I wasn't going up. He suggested we settle it with rock, paper, scissors. I was an idiot and agreed. I lost. So I was going up into the attic. Up to this point, we'd been joking about how weird everything was. I was slightly unsettled but hadn't said anything. I'd never seen an attic outside like this with alarms, and seriously, who leaves their house looking like it's stuck in the 60s? Reluctantly, I pulled out my gun and started climbing the ladder. I should mention, I'm chubby. Attics and ladders are not my friends. I stuck my head up just far enough to see that there were no people and not much stuff up there. The smell hit me immediately, like old people had been living up there for 20 years. Not an actual dead body, thankfully, but the unmistakable scent of long dead old people. I quickly came back down, reporting nothing but the weird smell. I shrugged it off as we prepared to leave. My partner pulled up next to me, jokingly saying, "We're looking at this all wrong. We weren't looking for someone getting into the attic. We should have been looking for something getting out." We laughed it off as a weird call on a weird job and drove away. As we headed back to our usual hiding spot about a mile away, I was in front and he was behind me in our separate cars. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw what looked like a person standing in the roadway. It appeared to be a black female wearing dark clothing and holding a light-colored bag, though I only saw the figure for a split second. I was not 100% sure of what I had seen, so I decided to wait and see if my partner said anything. A few seconds later, he called over the radio, saying that he and I were getting out with a person in the roadway at a nearby intersection. I turned around with him. All of this happened within probably 20 seconds. We drove back to the spot, and there was no one there. The person had completely vanished. We described what we saw to each other and realized we had both seen the same thing. No clue where the person, or whatever it was, went. The sighting was less than half a mile from the creepy house. At this point, we were pretty sure we were both haunted, thanks to work. We've had at least one more instance of strange, unexplained activity since then, and we blame it on our ghost. So that's the story of how I became haunted and ran into a ghost I apparently released. Story 8. I was working at a gas station around 3 in the morning one night. A car pulled up to a pump, a guy got out and started pumping gas, and then the car and the guy just vanished. I was looking right at them, and they simply popped out of existence. I told my boss the next day, and she turned white as a sheet. She had seen the same thing, the same car, the same pump, and the same guy. Story 9. I work the front gate at a military installation. The night shift is usually dull and quiet where I am. For a while, I noticed a dark green old Ford Bronco that would roll up. Whenever I stepped out of the gate shack, the vehicle would do a 180 and leave. This happened 2 or 3 times until I finally caught the license plate before it turned away. I ran the numbers to my supervisor. He asked if I was sure. I said I was 100% certain. He told me it couldn't be because the plate came back to a crash report involving that exact vehicle. The driver had died, and the Bronco had been totaled. That was enough to make me want to switch to day shift. Story 10. I was firmly against the idea of paranormal activity before I worked in an old folks' home. You always felt watched, always, even when you weren't in view of a camera. That was just the beginning. Several times while I was working, things would fly off the walls without any provocation. I'm talking about hand sanitizer containers launching 15 feet from the wall, cups sitting still on a counter and suddenly flying across the room, and clipboards all falling at once, even though they were spread across different walls. Nothing was more unsettling than Bill in room 209. Bill had lived in that room when he was a resident. While someone was visiting, they stayed in room 209. The visitor came downstairs and said that Bill had come into the room while he was in the shower and told him, "Don't worry, it's just Bill," then asked who Bill was. We explained that no one who lived or worked there had that name. A couple of days later, that same visitor was cleaning out records for the care center where they worked and found documentation showing that a resident named Bill had lived in room 209. When they told us this story, we all heard a knock on the window and turned to look. As we did, clipboards and bulletin boards flew off the opposite wall. We've decided Bill is friendly, but he likes attention. He's cool. Story 11. A lab building where I once worked was the site of a murder-suicide which happened while I was there. It was awful and sad. We didn't have shifts exactly, but I had to work late one night autoclaving equipment for the next day's experiment. The autoclave room was right next to the lab where it happened. I hadn't seen anyone else in the building. After I started the load, I was about to leave the room when I heard a crash outside. I opened the door immediately and saw that everything on a table in the hallway had been pushed onto the floor. Water bottles, a packet of papers, pens, all of it. Since I was right by the door, I would have seen or heard someone running away. It was against protocol to leave things in the autoclave overnight, so I had to stay another hour and a half to take them out, but nothing else happened. I left the mess on the floor though. I didn't want a repeat of that. Story 12. Not me, but a friend used to work as a night custodian at an elementary school. The building itself was fairly old, built sometime in the 1940s. He worked third shift and took over from the second shift around 9 in the evening. His job was mostly mopping floors and making sure no one broke in. If he finished early, he was basically free to do whatever he wanted. A lot of the time, he would hang out in an office because there was a small television to watch. He said things started off innocently enough. Lights would turn on in classrooms where he knew they had been off, and cabinets and doors would open and close on their own. He didn't pay much attention at first. He was on the fence about believing in paranormal activity, so he shrugged it off as coincidence. Early on, he would go check the noises. Sometimes he even crept around trying to catch someone in the act, in case there was a way into the building he didn't know about. After a month or so, he gave up looking and learned to ignore it. When he asked his boss about it, he was brushed off. Over the coming months, things steadily got worse. Doors no longer closed on their own, they slammed shut. He started hearing noises like children playing, sometimes screaming. He would find trash cans turned upside down, and things were thrown at him even though he was clearly alone, with nowhere for anyone to hide. He thought about quitting, but he was making good money for being nearly fresh out of high school, and he needed it for family reasons, so he stayed. He would come in, rush through his duties as fast as possible, then go sit in the office. He'd turn the television so he could face the door and stay there until the morning crew arrived at 6 in the morning. He didn't want to admit he was terrified of being alone in the school at night, so he tried to tough it out and made excuses to explain what was happening. The final straw came one night while he was sitting in the office watching television. He suddenly felt someone grab his chair from behind and flip it backward. There was clearly no one in the room, and no way for anyone to get in without him seeing them. He picked up the office phone and called his boss at home in the middle of the night, told him he quit and said he would come back in the morning to turn in his keys. He was a firm believer in the paranormal after that. Years later, he learned from someone who had researched the school's history before it was torn down that there had once been a swimming pool inside the building. Several children had drowned there in the early years until the administration decided to expand the school, fill the pool with concrete, and build over it. Story 13. I worked in a mine in northern Ontario. A couple of years before the incident, there had been a death on the 4,200 level. It was a normal day underground. We were rehabbing an old working that had collapsed. The 4,200 level was large. The drifts were 6 by 6 feet, but stretched for kilometers in every direction. Around midnight, we saw the mine rescue team with security rushing down the drift. Naturally, we dropped what we were doing and followed to see if we could help. We found a man as pale as a ghost. He didn't appear hurt, but he was shaking uncontrollably. Mine rescue approached him, but he resisted. He screamed. Not just any scream, but one so filled with fear it was almost otherworldly. Eventually, he stopped and just sat there, awake but unresponsive. By 3:30 in the morning, our shift was over, but we couldn't leave him. We managed to carry him out on a stretcher. On the way, he kept repeating, "The devil is on 42," over and over. About 2 years later, another incident report described the exact same thing, in the exact same spot, but involving a different person. I don't believe they actually saw the devil, but it always lingers in the back of my mind when I'm on 42. Story 14. I don't have a story myself, but here's one my wife likes to tell. She is a nurse, and for a couple of years she worked night shift in the palliative care unit, the comfort care and end-of-life unit. Patients in that unit are either expected to die there or to be sent home or to a care home to pass away. The rooms had radios, and according to her, it happened a few times that a radio would suddenly turn on. Within an hour or so, the patient in that room would pass away. One rather busy night, the radio turned on again. My wife went into the room, stared into the darkness, and said, "Cut that out. I don't have time for this." The radio immediately snapped off. No patient died during the rest of her shift, though one passed away shortly after she clocked out. Story 15. I used to work at IHOP. A cook before my time had been shot and killed during a robbery. I would often hear someone in the kitchen, like spatulas clanking, but no one would be there. Once, I saw a black figure in the back and assumed it was the cook. When I walked out to the front of the restaurant, the cook was sitting outside smoking, and there were no orders at the time. Other coworkers had experiences too. One said she felt pushed, but I can't speak to what I didn't see. Story 16. I do not inherently believe in ghosts, but if I had a paranormal story, it would be this one. I work in one of the major emergency rooms in my city as an HCA, and one of my tasks is providing post-mortem care to patients who die in our care. One night at around 2 in the morning, I was called to the room of an older palliative patient who had passed after the family finished their goodbyes. I went in to begin care, which usually means removing tubes, wires, and monitors, giving a bed bath, removing valuables for the family, and placing the patient in a gown and shroud. I like to talk to my patients, even after they have passed. It puts me at ease and shows respect. I explain what I am doing because they are still my patient. While I was giving the bed bath, I suddenly felt like I was being watched. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder and heard a man's voice say, "Thank you." The hand remained for a moment while I stood frozen, and then the feeling vanished. The room felt empty again. There were no other nurses or staff around, just me. I like to believe the patient was grateful for the care and for being spoken to with respect, even after death. Story 17. I am not a night shifter, but my dad kind of was. He used to be against the idea of anything paranormal, but now he admits that sometimes there are things that cannot be explained. He was a college student working toward his doctorate in dentistry. Because school was expensive, he had to live in a run-down apartment on the rough side of Philadelphia. As a result, he would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night after scaring off attempted home invaders. He became such a light sleeper that any noise would wake him instantly, and he would walk through the apartment to make sure no one had gotten inside. After the second or third break-in attempt, the local gangs learned to stay away from his place because of his reputation for fighting them off like Rambo. He and his roommate had an old, really old fridge with a light that did not work. The apartment building had been built in the 1960s and converted into a loft-style space with only one apartment for rent. He and his roommate split that single room into 2 living quarters. It had a tiny kitchen, a bathroom, a basement, and a front door reinforced with bars and broken glass. The kitchen was directly next to the bedroom, and the walls were paper thin. One night, he heard someone moving around in the kitchen. He grabbed his hunting knife and went to investigate. The fridge door was open, and the light was on. An old woman wrapped in a shawl was bent over examining the contents. My dad yelled, "Hey!" She turned, and in that instant the light snapped off. She vanished, and the fridge door slammed shut. To this day, he has no idea who she was or what she was. Story 18. I worked at a movie theater running the booths upstairs. The projectors were in a long corridor. At night, after the last showing in each theater, you would shut off the lights to that theater and the small light over the projector itself. Then, you would cover the platters to protect them from dust. It was not so bad at first because the nearby projectors were still running. But as you shut each one off one by one, the corridor got darker and darker, and the viewing windows into the theaters turned pitch black. The dull, steady whirring noise you ignored all night disappeared, replaced by absolute silence. Soon, the only light left was at the ends of the corridor where you sat between start times. It was spooky enough on its own. One particular night, I was putting covers over one of the platters and glanced up into a viewing window across the way. There was a face. A little boy's face. Sheet white. I know what I saw. I am sure there is an explanation and nothing actually supernatural about it, but there was a face there, and it scared the absolute life out of me. It made an already unsettling place feel even more terrifying for the rest of the time I worked there. For the record, inside the theater, those windows are a solid 8 to 10 feet above the seatbacks in the highest row. If someone was playing a prank, they would have needed a ladder, and even then, there would have been nowhere to put it. Story 19. Night watch in the barracks at Fort Gordon. That counts as a night shift, right? Anyway, so many things happened in 3 different rooms that I could write a book about them. It completely changed my belief in paranormal activity. This one happened in the middle of the night, so this is the one I will tell. I was sitting by the stairwell on the 2nd floor when I heard someone shouting in a room down the hallway. I was on duty, so I ran to the room and swung open the door expecting to see a fight. Instead, there were several people inside pointing up at the ceiling near a wall and saying, "They're doing it again." I asked them to explain, and they told me that ever since they moved into that room, someone had been lifting the ceiling tiles and making funny faces at them at night. The latrine was on the other side of the wall, so I went over to check, but no one was there. I climbed onto a desk in the room to lift the ceiling tiles and see if anyone was still up there. When I lifted them, all I saw was a cinder block wall that went all the way to the floor above. There was only about an inch between the back of the ceiling tile and the wall, no space large enough for a face. 2 of the soldiers freaked out, ran out of the room, and slept in the hallway. And that was only the first of many incidents. Story 20. I am a dedicated night shift nurse. Several years ago, the unit I worked on was set apart from the rest of the hospital in the oldest section of a more than 100-year-old building. During some basic repairs, they found mold and, according to rumors, asbestos in the walls. Our unit was shut down for a couple of months for renovation. They kept the nurses on wherever they could, which meant we were often extremely bored, acting as clerks or doing random odd jobs. A coworker and friend at the time was really into ghost hunting and even had a decent ghost hunting kit. Because we were not exactly needed, we had plenty of time to wander through the spookier corners of the hospital overnight. We did not find much, just the occasional EMF spike or something easily explained. After a couple of weeks, they took down the strict construction isolation around our unit, and we decided to check out some of the supposedly haunted rooms. The place was eerie. All of the utilities were shut off. Remember, it was separate from the rest of the hospital, and it was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. We went into one of the rooms where many deaths had occurred, since it was close to the nurses' station and often held more critical patients. We set up a voice recorder, a thermometer, and an EMF detector. Then, we started asking any present spirits questions, standard things like whether they had died in the room. Within a few minutes, the temperature dropped a couple of degrees. Then, the EMF monitor started going off in short bursts. Right as I asked, "Are you angry you died here?" The EMF detector squealed like a stuck pig, and we decided to get out of there. The next morning, we went to my place to play the audio recording on my computer. Everything was there, our questions and the EMF noises. Right at the moment I asked my last question, there was a sound on the recording that lined up perfectly with the EMF burst we heard in the room. It was a low, drawn-out moaning sound, like an amplified version of a death rattle. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, along with the worst goosebumps I have ever had. I have seen a lot of strange things in my time as a nurse. I am also a firm skeptic and love peer-reviewed evidence, but I still cannot quite believe that the recording, the temperature drop, and the EMF readings were something normal happening in an isolated unit of the hospital with all the utilities shut off. Edit. Like many other paranormal experiences, I cannot provide proof. The recording was lost in 2014 when my laptop was stolen. Story 21. I work on a boys' unit at a mental hospital. Recently, my patients have been complaining about seeing ghosts in their rooms at night. They claim they have seen artwork and coloring pages fly off the walls, doors open and close by themselves, and a few say they have seen full-body apparitions. Given their age and psychiatric status, I would normally take their stories with a grain of salt, but honestly, I sort of believe them. The hospital opened as an asylum in the mid-1800s, and patients have definitely died there. Much of the original building is still in use, including my unit. When I walk the halls at night, hours after the patients have fallen asleep, it genuinely feels like someone is always watching me. I think it is only a matter of time before I have my own ghostly encounter. Story 22. I used to intern at a recording studio in New York City years ago. It was technically open 24/7, meaning someone was always there whether clients were in or not. The studio was on an upper floor of the building, and because of all the expensive equipment, you could not access that floor by elevator without someone letting you up. The button for that floor was locked out, so it could not be pressed from inside the elevator. There was a camera at the front entrance downstairs, another at the elevator entrance, and one inside the elevator. All of them could be viewed from the front desk, so when people arrived, you would buzz them in, wait until you saw them enter the elevator, and then press the button to bring the elevator up to the studio floor. One night, I was working the overnight shift, just me and another guy doing cleaning and maintenance, when we suddenly heard the elevator running at around 3:30 in the morning. The whole building was filled with offices, so after 6 p.m., there was basically nobody there but us. We thought it was strange, but figured maybe someone was still in the building and called it from another floor. It made sense until the elevator stopped at our floor. We heard the ding. We were both in the lobby, about 15 feet from the elevator, and just stared at each other with the hardest what the heck look imaginable. I can't describe how much I did not want those doors to open. We froze, eyes locked on the elevator. The doors slid open. Nobody was there. No one had pressed the button. Nothing. We stayed still, staring, and it got creepier with every second the doors stayed open. Usually they shut after 5 seconds. This time, they stayed wide open for what felt like forever, 20, 30 seconds. Like something invisible was standing in the doorway blocking the sensor. Then the doors finally closed, and the elevator went back down to the lobby. We just stood there in silence, and then both said, "What the fuck, dude?" at the exact same time. The next day, we asked some of the other guys about it. One of them said the exact same thing happened to him in the middle of the night when he was alone. Said he nearly shit himself. Maybe there's a logical explanation for it. Elevator malfunction, random glitch, whatever. But it was still really damn freaky. The place was already creepy at night, and there had been a few other weird things that happened there. That one just stuck with me. Story 23. I have 2 stories. My first overnight job was as a train dispatcher in Vermont. The dispatch center was inside a train station that was about 100 years old. Maybe being on day 6 on the extra board made me quiet, but I swear I saw a man standing in front of the restrooms at around 4 in the morning. White guy, 40s, semi-formal clothes. A bunch of coworkers reported seeing the same kind of thing. My second experience was when I worked overnights at a mental health crisis house. It was a home-like setting, a step below inpatient care for mental health issues and a safe space for people at risk of relapse. There was one room everyone got weird vibes from. Whenever I did a room check, I felt like I was being watched. Other night staff reported stomping noises upstairs, voices, and sudden temperature drops in the main room. That room also had the highest rate of self-harm and bump-ups, sending clients to inpatient or calling the police when things got violent. I tried to sage and salt the room once and even banged on pots asking whatever was there to leave. It actually started stomping more whenever I was around. Sometimes there were no clients in the house, so I could sleep on the couch between calls, and I started having a lot more lucid dreams and sleep paralysis after trying to get rid of it. What I found interesting was how many different cultures came through the house, and how often people who were spiritually connected could sense that something was off about the room. We had people connected to Kabbalah, Santeria, New Age beliefs, Catholicism, you name it. Every one of them picked up on the same strange vibe. Story 24. This is a second-hand story, and just to be clear, I do not personally believe in paranormal activity, as I have never experienced anything I could not explain through more likely causes. That said, in the house I grew up in, my sister always said there was a ghost, a friendly elderly man in a flat cap. She never described him as frightening or aggressive. When we moved out, we sold the house to a friend of my mother's who planned to renovate it and sell it on. We later learned that one of the younger apprentices working on the house said he had seen an elderly man a couple of times, usually passing him on the stairs. One day, after walking past him, the apprentice turned around to ask who he was, suddenly realizing he had never spoken to the fellow and did not recognize him as part of the crew. But when he turned, the man had simply vanished. He asked one of the senior workers who the older gentleman was, only to be told there was no one on the team who fit that description. The next time he saw him, the same thing happened. He passed him in the hallway, turned around to speak, and the man disappeared. The apprentice refused to enter the house again. When he described the man in detail, it matched exactly what my sister had said years earlier. Very strange indeed, and not something I can easily explain, but since I never personally saw or heard anything, take it for what it is. Story 25. It did not happen on a night shift, but on a bleak, stormy day with just as much spooky potential. I was alone in the kitchen of the sandwich shop when I noticed a customer standing in the lobby. I had never heard him come in. The door is squeaky and slams shut hard, so it is nearly impossible to miss someone walking through it, even without a bell. His back was to me, facing the far wall, standing right in the middle of the room. I never saw his face, but he seemed to be an older man, maybe in his 70s. I greeted him with a hello, but he did not respond. The stillness in the way he stood there, coupled with his position in that dim lighting, lights low because it had been hot and humid before the storm, gave off a Blair Witch-type feeling in hindsight. At the time, though, I brushed it off. I figured he was just staring out the window or deciding what to order. And I am used to customers ignoring me, so his silence did not seem especially unusual. I turned away to wash my hands so I'd be ready to make his sandwich once he ordered. I had my back to him for about 20 seconds. Yes, this was during COVID, so I was counting. And when I turned around, he was gone. I never heard the heavy door open or close, and the only other door he could have used was close enough that I would have absolutely noticed. He never came back, and I cannot imagine why anyone would walk into a sandwich shop for 30 seconds just to stand facing the wall and then leave without a word. And now that I think about it, he did not even look wet, and it was pouring outside. So, I'm not usually one to believe in ghosts, but a silent old man with Blair Witch vibes on a dark and stormy day, appearing and disappearing without a sound. I definitely saw a ghost that day. Story 26. I used to work the very early shift making bagels, 3 o'clock in the morning, and would sometimes see things in the reflection of my oven running around behind me. They looked like chickens. I told a coworker, and he took me to the back where we stored the flour and pointed at the ceiling. It was completely crusted with a dark brown, fuzzy-looking substance. He told me the building had once been a chicken processing plant. Thousands of chickens had died right there. The stuff on the ceiling was blood and feathers. Story 27. Not exactly a night shift, but I used to work in a bar next door to a funeral director's. It had actually once been part of the funeral director's, and the welcome slab outside still had the name and year carved into it, like Ferguson's 1891. We were in Scotland, so we closed by 1 o'clock in the morning at the latest. There were a few odd events, nothing terrifying, but the whole place felt unsettling when you were there alone. Our night routine meant one staff member stayed downstairs counting tills while the other cleaned the venue. One night, I was polishing the bar taps when I saw someone standing behind me in the reflection. I spun around and no one was there. I messaged my coworker to come upstairs, but before she even got the message, she called up to me from the bottom of the stairs. When we met, she said she had heard me going up and down the stairs several times. The strange part was that she had been counting cash 2 floors below me, and I hadn't gone down even 1 flight of stairs all night. This place also had 2 sets of stairs that led nowhere, and in our wine cellar there was a massive old iron door with a wheel to open it. I never knew what it was for, and the wine racks were built over it so you couldn't try to open it anyway. In the girls' toilets, there was a section that looked like it should have been a window, but it was boarded up and below street level. It was just a board covering a sharp 13-foot drop into some kind of underground alley. One night, after locking up, we stayed behind for a couple of drinks, and one of my co-workers was dared to jump down. She did, landed fine, and we were all laughing. Then she suddenly went quiet and started panicking, asking us to help her out. When we did, she stayed quiet and went home. A few days later, she said she had felt someone touching her arm. Not a light brush, but like a palm pressed on her forearm with fingers wrapped around it. Story 28. While working in a psych ward every morning at about 2 o'clock, there would be the sound of someone running down the main service hallway, followed by the same door at the end slamming shut. One night, I kept a close eye on the area, but when I was distracted for a few seconds, the footsteps began. When I reached the hallway, there was nothing there. According to one of the managers, it had been happening for several years, always at the same time, and most people believed it was the ghost of a former client. Another time, all the battery-powered wall clocks in the unit spun around several times at once. That was terrifying, and everyone screamed. Story 29. Not a night shift story, just something that happened to me. I don't really believe in the paranormal, but one thing happened that I still can't explain. I've shared it on Reddit before. I was a teenager studying for major secondary school exams. One weekend, my parents, brother, and grandparents went to a function, and I was home alone. Because of the country I live in, our house has steel grills in front of every door and window, like a prison. My room is at the front of the house. It was something like 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night. I walked to the kitchen at the opposite end of the house. The stairs to the second floor are there too, where my parents' and brother's rooms are. As I was getting something from the fridge, I heard my mom yell my name. I said, "Coming," and started up the steps. 2 steps up, I suddenly remembered that it made no sense. I was home alone. I called out and I heard my name again. Absolutely not. I don't normally run, but I sprinted back to my room and locked the door. After a couple of minutes, thinking I must have imagined it, I decided to head back to the kitchen. As I unlocked my door, I heard footsteps in the passageway right on cue. Nope. I locked the door again, grabbed something from my desk to defend myself, and hid under the bed. The footsteps stopped at my door. I stayed under the bed for almost half an hour until my parents called to say they were nearly home. I went to unlock the place so they could get in, and nothing was open or broken, so it clearly wasn't a person. It has been roughly 12 years, and I still have no idea what happened that night. Story 30. I work the night shift in a hotel. It is a pretty old building, so there is always some weird stuff happening. What stands out most is a very creepy statue that sits in the lobby. One night, the statue was gone. I asked the morning receptionist why it had been removed, and she looked confused. We checked, and it was there again. I swear it had been gone during the night. On my next shift, I can take a picture of the statue if anyone is interested. It is a very creepy statue. Story 31. I work at a Walmart. When I started working apparel on the night shift, the others in that department tried to spook me with stories about it being haunted and all that. I did not really care. I grew up in a haunted house, so ghost stories did not bother me. And then we actually experienced something. I was like, neat. But one of the coworkers who had been trying to scare me freaked right out. It was hilarious. She and I had been standing about 5 or 6 feet apart talking. The store had closed at midnight and we were the only ones in apparel. Right between us, we both heard a female voice as clear as day. I only heard the voice, but not the words. My coworker said she heard words, but she was so freaked out she never told me what she actually heard. Story 32. I used to be a manager at a local movie theater, and we definitely had some spookery afoot. The theater was relatively new, as was the road it sat on. The whole area had been developed in the late 1990s. Before that, it had all been farmland. The street where the theater now stood, along with the shopping centers and the Walmart, had once been the site of an old farmhouse. Sadly, and very much like a horror movie, the farm had been home to a brutal family murder. The father killed the entire family and then himself. I started working at the theater in 2007, and from day one, new employees were told about the ghosts. I had worked in plenty of places, and most had some kind of haunting legend, but every single employee said 3 things. A, the theater was haunted. B, there were multiple ghosts. C, they were so active you would get used to it very quickly. And they were not wrong. Theater 12 was the most haunted place in the building. It was a benevolent haunting. It never felt malicious, but it was definitely there. A girl had died in that auditorium during the theater's 2nd year. She fell from the row of seats above the rampway and landed on her head. Her presence felt playful. And once you accepted there really was a ghost, it did not bother you much. She would knock armchairs down. Ushers always had to walk through and put them all back up, and she would open and close doors. The first time I truly accepted she was there involved those armchairs. I had just gone through and put them all up when one fell. I put it back, and the armchair next to it fell. Then the whole row fell. It was scary, but once you told yourself it was a kid playing, it somehow became less scary. She also listened. If you told her you were scared, she would stop. The upstairs was haunted by a man. Nobody knew who he was, but everyone assumed it was the father who had killed the family. All I know is that this spirit felt angry. The girl was playful, and even though she was not confined to Theater 12, that was where she was most active. And you never felt scared when something of hers happened. The one upstairs was different. He slammed doors, held doors shut when you were trying to leave, and constantly turned lights on and off. The lights were the worst part. The upstairs booth was one long room with all the projectors, and the light switches were on each end. When the lights went out, it was about a 30-second walk to turn them back on. You could feel someone there with you, and it was the kind of feeling you get when you are in a room with someone who is furious at you, but silent. People said they saw things fly across the room or off desks. I never saw that myself, but the lights and the doors were enough for me. There were plenty of other things too. If anyone is interested, I can share more. Story 33. In college, I worked the night shift from midnight to 8 in the morning. Partway through, I would often take a break to run home and eat. At the time, I lived on the top floor of an 11-story high-rise. The building was constructed in the early 1920s and had a reputation for being haunted. Whenever I had ghostly run-ins during my break, the pattern was always the same. I would leave my apartment on the 11th floor and press the lobby button. If something unusual was going to happen, the elevator would stop on the 7th floor. The doors would open, and no one would be there. Once the doors closed again, instead of going to the lobby, the elevator would drop all the way down to the basement level, which required key access. When the doors opened, they revealed a long, dark hallway with dim green lights at the far end. The energy felt completely off, and I would clench my eyes shut until the doors closed and carried me back up to the lobby. After looking into the building's history, I found several accounts of hauntings. Apparently, in the early days of the high-rise, several prostitutes had been found dead in the basement. After that, I could not shake the thought that maybe there was someone, or something, entering the elevator on the 7th floor. Story 34. I used to live on site at an 18th century historic home and museum previously owned by a founding father. There were 3 or 4 of us who had houses on the property, and the rule was that someone had to be there 24/7, 365 days a year to respond to any issues, securing the property at closing, dealing with trespassers, responding to fire or burglar alarms, and so on. I have many stories about the weird things that happened there, but this one is my favorite because it was witnessed by me and 2 police officers, documented in a police report and recorded in the alarm logs. One night, I got a call in the middle of the night from the alarm company. Someone had definitely broken into the historic house. They had managed to get in without setting off an entry alarm, but they triggered 4 motion detectors in succession on the 2nd floor. Given the situation, I had the police dispatched and met them outside. We didn't see an obvious point of entry, so 2 officers stayed outside in case the burglar tried to run, and I went in with 2 others. They started clearing rooms from the basement up while I checked the alarm system for any faults. I met back up with them on the 1st floor. They were both standing at the foot of the main staircase, flashlights pointing up at a chair perched right on the edge of the top stair. Officer 1, is that supposed to be there? Me, no, it should be in the first room on the left. Officer 1, the motion detectors. Were they the ones between that room and this chair? Me, uh-huh. Officer 2, man, I'm not going up there. None of our stuff works on ghosts. So the one officer cleared the 2nd floor, while I put the chair back in place, and the other officer stayed at the foot of the stairs. After rearming the building, we all gathered at one of the patrol cars to write the incident report. We ended up blaming a raccoon that got in through the attic. It made no sense, but it was better than writing, IDK, ghost moved a chair. The next day, I had to turn in the report to the museum's director. He read it and immediately said, "Oh yeah, that wasn't a raccoon. Was it really cold when you got to the top of the stairs? Kim, here are sets hair wet was." Story 35. I was visiting a supposed murder site in some woods in Colorado with a friend of mine. We had been there for about 5 minutes when my friend suddenly stopped and said loudly, "There are 4 shadow people moving toward us," pointing in 4 different directions. I looked to the right of us, the only side with any light, and I watched a shadow leap across the light into a bush. Then it pulled itself out of the bush and began to stagger toward us. It moved in these strange, jerky motions, straight up like something out of a Tool music video, stooped, twitching, solid black, with no clear features except a lumpy human-shaped outline. Story 36. I did security on night shift for 3 months. One of the accounts was an old building that had been renovated into an assisted living facility after sitting vacant for so many years. Everyone in town swore it was haunted, but no one could actually say yes or no. All the doors were alarmed and would call out over the radio announcing exactly which ground floor door was opened. One night, I had just finished calling into base that rounds were good when suddenly the alarm for one of the doors went off. The nurse and I got to the door within 30 seconds, and it wasn't open. It was still locked. No one was outside. We shut the alarm off and I called it in. We did a full top to bottom sweep and room count. All residents and staff were accounted for. Base called to make sure we were clear. Still no way to explain it, because you literally had to unlock the door and open it at least 1 foot, about 30 centimeters, to even trigger the alarm. Story 37. There might be a logical explanation for this, but I cannot think of one. It is also weirdly mundane. So if this was my brush with supernatural forces, I do not really know how to feel about it. I used to work in an old folks' home doing night shifts. One of the small miscellaneous jobs the night staff had to do was unload the dishwasher in the little kitchen area for the residents and make sure all the dishes were neatly put away in the correct cupboards. One night, I got to unloading the dishwasher and realized someone had put a bowl in there facing upwards. I was mildly annoyed at whoever did that, but I started packing the mugs into their cupboard above the dishwasher. As a short woman, I had to get up on my tiptoes and stretch to put the last few mugs into the cupboard. Then, one of the mugs fell. I was focusing on making sure the other mugs in the cupboard were stable, so I did not see where it landed. But I heard smashing ceramic, so I knew it had broken. I secured the other mugs and went to assess the damage. To my surprise, the smashing sound I had heard wasn't the mug, it was the bowl. It had split neatly into 3 pieces. As I started cleaning it up, I realized that there were no pieces of the mug anywhere. Apparently, it had somehow disappeared. I looked around for a while, trying to figure out where the mug had landed, but I could not find it anywhere. I knew it wasn't mixed in with the bowl pieces because the bowl had split so neatly I could piece it back together, and there were no pieces with a handle. I searched for some time and eventually had to give up. I haven't worked there for a few years, but I occasionally wonder if one of my old coworkers ever opened that dishwasher and found a smashed mug at the bottom, as if it had traveled forwards in time. I don't know why I immediately jumped to time-jumping mug, but I'm going with it. Story 38. A patient once asked me to hide her cinnamon roll because the kids would steal things and keep her up all night. A month later, I was running around looking for these kids and they just disappeared. I left that job, but years later, when I came back, a dementia patient would be up all night talking to these damn kids. I would have to put them to bed when I came off shift so she could finally sleep. Story 39. Early morning opening a warehouse I was a manager at. No one else there. Has a motion-sensitive alarm that I have to disable when I open. Locked the door behind me. Went to, go take a dump. I'm in the stall and I hear the door open. Hear footsteps go from the door and hear the stall next to me open and close. No feet present. I finished and stayed in the break room until someone else arrived. Grandmother's house. At night, I would hear footsteps in the attic, and then dishes in the dish rack would be moved back and forth. My mother has heard someone calling her name in one of the rooms when no one is home. Grandma's friend came over and saw my aunt's ex-husband standing in the dining room. He died in the house 2 days prior. Story 40. I did night snow removal this past winter, 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. One of our regular spots was this old, run-down army barracks or armory in the city that had been turned into a historical site. Creepy place, even in daylight. We showed up one night around 2:15 a.m., and the guy I was working with went uneasy the second we pulled in. I figured we'd clear the stairs and sidewalks fast and come back later when it felt less haunted. About 5 minutes into blowing snow with the backpack blowers, we both heard this horrible screech from somewhere underground or beneath the building. We shut everything down, looked at each other, and said, nope. We packed up and left. We came back around 3:30 a.m. with our crew led after telling him what happened. And that's when it got weird. There were hundreds of ripped bits of fabric and twigs tied in these intricate knots and patterns all around the entire building, hanging from windows, door frames, lights, trees, even the roof. All of it had shown up in the hour we were gone. One of the doors had been taken off its hinges, just lying in the doorway so it still looked closed at a glance. We didn't stick around to solve anything. Looked like straight-up Blair Witch stuff, and I was not getting paid nearly enough to investigate. Nope. Story 41. About a year ago, I pulled an all-nighter to study. Pretty normal for me at the time. I'd study through the night, take the test in the morning, then finally sleep when I got home. Basically, nocturnal student edition. My laptop is ancient, like 9 years old, and the battery is completely dead. It only works when it's plugged in. Around 3 a.m., I decided to take a break. I left the laptop open on the desk, lay down on the bed, and suddenly it shut itself off. I figured, okay, classic old man laptop moment. But then I unplugged it, and it turned on again. I just sat there like, nope, no way. And the screen that came up was something I'd never seen before. Some weird static drizzle pattern. I closed the laptop, opened it again, and this time, the screen was black. And then, out of frigging nowhere, it started typing by itself. At that point, I basically noped into the next dimension. I slammed it shut, yanked out the battery, and got as far away from that thing as physically possible. Not my most peaceful study break. Story 42. My wife and I were hanging out at a pottery studio one night. We were the only ones there, and I had a key to the place. I'd locked the front door, one of those doors that squeaks loudly when it opens, so you always hear it. I was putting handles on some mugs, and my wife was hand-building small pieces, when we both heard the squeak of the front door opening. It was about 10:30 p.m. No one should have been there. We got up to check cautiously and heard papers rustling in one of the offices. The lights were off, and we couldn't see anyone through the windows. The front door was still locked. We didn't stick around to debate it. We packed up and left fast. After that, we never stayed late again. One of the teachers there once told us he stayed late one night and saw someone walk into the dark back storage area. He didn't bother checking either. Story 43. A little late to the punch here, but I figure I'll share. For context, I'm a psychology student, so I chalk what happened up to sleep deprivation. That said, I still have doubts. I worked overnight stocking shelves at a large grocery store. From day one, something about that place made me uneasy. I assumed it was just the shift change. I'd flipped my schedule a week early to sleep during the day and stay up all night, so I'd be ready for the job. Normally, when I get a bad feeling about a place, I'm right. This time, I ignored it. I probably shouldn't have. A week into the job, I started seeing a dark silhouette out of the corner of my eye, always lurking in the shadows cast by the fluorescent lights. I shrugged it off. At that hour, after that much fatigue, it didn't seem far-fetched to be seeing things. The next week, though, the figure wasn't hiding in the shadows anymore. It stood in the center of the aisle, tall, oddly shaped, almost like it had a coned head. I wasn't even thinking about the first sighting anymore, but now this thing was standing out in the open and I started to feel genuinely creeped out. But I needed the money to go on a trip, so I kept showing up. I'd had bad feelings about places before, but never anything more than that. I figured I'd just deal with the figure at a distance, and it would stay part of the background. I was wrong about that. A few days after I started seeing the silhouette in the center of the aisles, I had another experience. I was crouched down, stocking cans on a lower shelf, when I heard footsteps behind me. Probably another stock boy passing by. Naturally, I turned to see if he needed anything. Instead, I saw a figure. It was 7 or 8 feet tall. I looked up, and I could vividly see it wasn't human. The thing was shaped almost like a star. Long, spindly limbs, a stout torso, a short, cone-shaped head. Its body looked like it was made of black leather or tar, shiny enough to catch the fluorescent light. I saw it for maybe a second. I blinked, and it was gone. Right after, I felt disoriented, kind of dizzy and unfocused, so I stepped away and took a breather before going back to work. That disorientation made me think sleep deprivation might have something to do with it, and maybe it did, but I still don't know what I saw or how I saw it. Later that night, I had a different experience just as vivid, but I've already typed way more than I expected. Luckily, this all happened right as I was planning to quit and leave for my trip. I didn't stick around much longer. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.